The ancient Egyptians may have hidden something stranger than the mummies and gold. Some say it is a tic-tac shaped object buried under a pyramid, and it wasn't just anywhere. It was inside one of the most mysterious sites in Egypt, the Labyrinth of Hawara. Ancient historians claim it was greater than the pyramids of Giza, yet today hardly anyone has seen it, and most of what we know comes from old stories, lost reports, and a trail of speculation. When people think of Egypt, they think of Giza, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the endless desert sand. But 2,000 years ago, when Greek travelers came to Egypt, they weren't writing about the pyramids as the greatest wonders. They wrote about something else, a massive labyrinth structure with more than 3,000 rooms, endless corridors, courts, and hidden passages, a place so vast that Herodotus, the so-called father of history, said it surpassed every monument in Egypt combined, built as a part of the Hawara Pyramid. The pyramid at Hawara belonged to a man named Amenemhat III, one of the most powerful rulers of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. He reigned around 1800 BC, during the 12th dynasty. This was a different era than the time of the Great Pyramids at Giza, which was already 1,000 years old by then. Egypt had gone through cycles of collapse and recovery, and under Amenemhat, it was back at the height of its power. He controlled the Fayum, a region of fertile land west of the Nile. Fed by canals that diverted water from the river, this land was the breadbasket of Egypt, and Hawara was at its center. Amenemhat built two pyramids, one at Dashur and the other one at Hawara. The Dashur pyramid collapsed because it was built of mud bricks and limestone that couldn't withstand time. But at Hawara, he tried something different. He built not just a pyramid, but also an enormous temple complex. This was the labyrinth. To the Egyptians, it was called a mortuary temple, a place where the king would be worshipped after death. But if the ancient Greek writers are to be believed, it was far more than that. It was a building so vast that none of the Greeks had ever seen something equal. The labyrinth was just not a temple. It was not just a tomb. According to ancient accounts, it was a monument to the nomes of Egypt, the province of the kingdom. 12 great courts, 3,000 chambers, carved with reliefs and covered with roofs of stone made of a single slab. And at the heart of it all, a pyramid. The pyramid is still there today, standing in the Fayum oasis at a site called Hawara, but the labyrinth itself gone, or at least buried. The official story says the labyrinth was dismantled, its stones robbed for later construction. The sands and waters swallowed whatever remained. But modern researchers have challenged that view. They claim that deep below the ground, beneath the mud and irrigation canals of Hawara, something still waits. In 2008, a team using ground-penetrating radar announced they had detected vast structures under the sand, massive chambers unexplored. But data of the expedition was never published, and that is where the rumors begin. That what lies hidden below is not just the remains of a temple, but something far stranger. Before we get lost in speculation, let's start with what the ancient actually said, because if you want to understand why the Pyramid of Hawara and its labyrinth fascinate people, you have to go back to the earliest written testimony that comes from Herodotus, writing around 450 BC. In Book 2 of his histories, he describes the labyrinth in detail. His words are worth quoting, because they are the foundation of this entire mystery. I saw myself, and indeed it is beyond words, for if one were to collect the buildings of works of the Greeks, they would altogether prove inferior to this labyrinth in workmanship and expense. Even the pyramids are beyond description, and each of them is a match for many of the great works of Greece, but the labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. Herodotus goes on to describe 12 courts, arranged in 2 levels, one above the ground and one below. He says the lower level contained the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles, but the Egyptians refused to let him see it. He only saw the upper level, thousands of chambers, endless corridors, doors that led to more doors, walls covering carvings, and he swore it was real. He saw it with his own eyes. That's our first eyewitness. If we can trust him, the second major witness is Strabo, the Greek geographer, who visited Egypt around the 25 BC. Strabo also describes the labyrinth, call it a great structure, near the pyramid of the 12th dynasty pharaoh Amenemhat III. He mentions courts surrounded by columns, connected by winding passages, and he too compares it to a city under one roof. And Pliny the Elder, writing a few decades later, repeats these claims and calls it one of the marvels of Egypt. So we have at least 5 ancient sources saying the labyrinth existed. But here's the problem. When archaeologists finally went looking for it, they found almost nothing. And that question leads us to the next part of the story, the excavations. Because in the late 19th century, when Flinders Petrie dug at Hawara, he wasn't just looking for the pyramid, he was hunting for the labyrinth itself. And what he found, and failed to find, has fueled debate ever since. Other Europeans had dug in Hawara, and by the 19th century, the labyrinth was already a legend. Travelers wrote about a mound of rubble, scattered blocks, and canals flooding the area, but nothing resembling the vast halls of Herodotus. Most believe it was gone, dismantled and swallowed by mud. And then came Flinders Petrie, the founding figure of modern archaeology. In 1888, Flinders Petrie set up his camp at Hawara. He knew the stories of Herodotus and Strabo. He expected to find ruins of the labyrinth near the pyramid of Amenemhat III. His team dug through sand, mud, and rubble, and what they uncovered was massive, just not in the way they hoped. They found the stone foundation of an enormous building, roughly 300 meters long and 244 meters wide. That's nearly the size of 4 football fields. This was no small temple, it was the footprint of something colossal. Petrie studied the foundation walls and concluded they belonged to the labyrinth. But the superstructure, the walls, the roof, the carved reliefs described by Herodotus were gone. Locals had long since quarried the stone for later buildings, canals, and villages. To Petrie, the labyrinth was real, but destroyed. He sketched out what little he could find. Outlines of courts, traces of doors, fragments of statues. It was enough to prove that a massive complex once stood there, but it wasn't enough to confirm the legendary 3,000 rooms. Petrie left Hawara somewhat disappointed, though he made other discoveries, like the entrance to the pyramid and the inner halls, burials, mummies. His verdict: the labyrinth had existed, but nothing remained, only its foundation. And yet, future researchers weren't convinced. If the ancients were telling the truth, where did all that stone go? And what about the underground chambers that Herodotus wasn't allowed to see? Petrie admitted he didn't excavate below the water table. Even in the 19th century, the site was partly flooded by irrigation canals. He couldn't get deep enough. Maybe the foundations he saw were only the top layer, and something much larger still waits below. That possibility has kept the legend alive. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated wildly. He is known for repeating stories without verifying them. Maybe he saw some ruined halls and was told tales by his guides. Maybe Strabo and the others relied on second-hand reports, repeating a myth that had already grown. Herodotus insisted he saw it with his own eyes, and Strabo too claims to have visited. These were not casual travelers. They were educated men recording what they saw. Could they have all been fooled? Mainstream archaeology says yes, they were fooled. But not everybody agreed. Over the years, other expeditions returned to Hawara. Belgian archaeologists in the 20th century studied the site, mapping the canals and attempted limited digs. They too ran into the same problem: water. The oasis of Fayum sits below the waterline. The Nile has flooded the area for centuries. Beneath a few meters, the water table rises, making excavation nearly impossible. Anything below ground is sealed away, trapped under mud and groundwater. These limitations kept the mystery alive. Remember what Herodotus said: half the chambers were underground, and the Egyptians never allowed him to see them. Petrie admitted he couldn't dig below the water, which meant that if those chambers exist, they're still hidden, untouched. The possibility was what archaeologists dream about, but digging was out of the question. Then in 2008, a team calling themselves the Mataha expedition arrived. They were a group of Egyptian authorities the Ghent University in Belgium, and a group of independent researchers founded by artist Louis de Cordia. Instead of digging, they used ground-penetrating radar and other geophysical tools to scan beneath the surface. Their goal? To see what lay below the sand and water without excavation. What they reported was explosive. According to their survey, the ground beneath Hawara showed massive geometric anomalies, patterns consistent with chambers, walls, and corridors. They claimed to have detected vast structures extending deep underground, right where the labyrinth should be. One researcher even said it matched the scale described by Herodotus. For a moment it seemed like the labyrinth had been rediscovered. But then silence. The results were never formally published in peer-reviewed journals. The team said the Egyptian authorities restricted them, not allowing them to release the data, under threats of being prosecuted for reasons of national security. The Mataha website posted vague diagrams showing grid-like patterns underground, but without the full data, archaeologists dismissed it as inconclusive. And this is where the mystery shifted gears, because some saw it as proof that the Egyptian government was hiding something. Why suppress the data? Why stop further research? What were they hiding? The Mataha team claimed they were shut out. Their scans were locked away, access denied. Years later, the topic's still controversial. Skeptics say the scans are ambiguous. Ground-penetrating radar often produces confusing results, especially in wet soil. What looks like a wall could be natural layering. Believers insist the radar confirmed what the ancients said. There are halls and chambers under Hawara, untouched for thousands of years. And then came the sensational claims, as one of the Mataha data analysts told a fellow researcher that they had uncovered a structure consisting of several levels, all meeting at a center point in an atrium, and in the lowest part, a cylindrical shaped object about 20 meters long and 5 meters in width, made out of metal. What could it be? They pleaded the Egyptian authorities to go back and dig, or at least send a probe, as the chambers were deep about 30 meters but untouched by water. But the answer was that the head Egyptian counterpart of the team of the Mahara group was jailed. Think about it. Herodotus said the lower chambers were off limits. The Egyptians told him they were the tombs of kings and sacred gods. What if they were hiding something else? What if those sealed chambers were never meant to be opened? What if they had a real god, fallen from the skies, an alien spaceship? By the late 2000s, the labyrinth of Hawara had transformed from an obscure ruin into a magnet for mystery hunters, not only for the UFO crowd, but for archaeologists too. Many tried to get permits and probe the site with robots to see what was under the sand, but it was impossible as the Egyptian government didn't recognize the need for further investigation. Zahi Hawass, Ministry of Egyptian Antiquities, not only refused to reveal data, but he sealed off the site, and the mystery just got bigger. The most common claim is that the labyrinth hides the books of knowledge given by God to Enoch, also known as the records of Atlantis. This idea comes from the so-called Hall of Records theory, made popular by writers like Edgar Cayce in the early 20th century. Cayce, a psychic, claimed that the Atlanteans stored their ancient knowledge in 3 secret repositories, one in the Yucatan Peninsula, one under the Sphinx at Giza, and one in the labyrinth at Hawara. According to him, the labyrinth would be uncovered in modern times, and its archives would reveal the lost history of humanity. Then came the Tic Tac UAP video, reported by the Nimitz US Navy pilots in 2004 off the coast of California and officially released by the Pentagon in 2017. The shape that caught attention was the so-called Tic Tac object, a metallic capsule craft perfectly matching what was detected in the scans at Hawara. Had something out of this earth been hidden in the labyrinth thousands of years ago? Could it be coincidence that 10 years before the Nimitz incident was known about, the same metallic shape was detected buried in the desert? Could the forbidden knowledge be a gift from an ancient civilization that exists until our days, hidden in the bottom of the ocean, waiting for the right time to reveal itself to humans? Or maybe we are the aliens and they predate us. And then there's the theory of hidden energy technologies. Certain French researchers argue that the labyrinth was more than a temple or a tomb. They point out to enormous slabs of stones Petrie discovered, saying that they could have acted as conductors or resonators. They compared the labyrinth to a massive power plant designed not for religion but for harnessing energy. These theories connects Hawara to similar claims about the Great Pyramid. Add to this the fact that the labyrinth was linked to crocodiles. The Fayum region was home to the cult of Sobek, the crocodile god. Mummified crocodiles have been found at Hawara. Some theories stretch this into an alien connection, claiming the Egyptians were imitating reptilian gods. My take? Until the Egyptian authorities allowed at least a robot to go under the sand and take a look, this one will remain a mystery.